License, registration, and proof of insurance.
Good afternoon, officer. May I ask why I'm being stopped?
You're parked too close to the hydrant. Hand over your documents.
I believe I'm parked legally, officer.
Picture the suffocating, heavy heat of a late August afternoon in a quiet, affluent suburb just outside of Chicago. The kind of neighborhood where the lawns are manicured with mathematical precision, the streets are shaded by ancient oak trees, and the silence is only broken by the occasional hum of a high-end landscaping crew. Parked along the curb of Elm Street in a dark blue Volvo sits Dr. Eleanor Vance. She is a woman in her late 40s, dressed in a crisp linen blouse, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. The engine is off, but the windows are rolled down to catch whatever breeze might push through the stifling air. Eleanor is entirely absorbed in the glowing screen of her laptop, frantically typing out a response to her department dean regarding an upcoming symposium. She had been driving home, felt the familiar vibration of an urgent email, and did the responsible thing. She pulled over to answer it. Before turning off the ignition, she had instinctively checked her surroundings. She was a good 15 feet away from the faded yellow fire hydrant on the corner, well within the legal parking limits of the state. She was simply a professional taking a moment to work in her own car. But to Sheriff's Deputy Thomas Miller cruising past in his patrol SUV, she was an anomaly. Deputy Miller is a 15-year veteran of the force. He considers himself a good cop, a man who relies on his gut, a protector of this quiet suburban enclave. He does not consider himself a racist. If you asked him, he would vehemently deny any such accusation, pointing to his spotless record and his community service. But implicit bias does not always announce itself with slurs or overt hostility. It often whispers in the language of suspicion. It disguises itself as a sixth sense or a hunch. When Miller's eyes scan the street and land on Eleanor, a black woman sitting alone in a parked car in a predominantly white neighborhood, his brain skips over a dozen innocuous explanations and lands immediately on suspicion. She doesn't look like she belongs here. She looks like she's loitering. She looks like she's scoping out houses. He decides to run her plates. The system returns a clean record. The car is registered to an Eleanor Vance at an address just 3 miles away in a slightly more diverse, upper-middle-class neighborhood. There are no warrants, no flags. A truly objective officer would have kept driving. But Miller's gut is already committed to the narrative of suspicion. He needs a reason to engage. His eyes drift to the fire hydrant. It's close, maybe 10 feet, maybe 15. It's close enough for government work. He flips on his overhead lights. Inside the Volvo, the sudden flashing of red and blue lights reflecting in the rearview mirror causes Eleanor's heart to skip a beat. It is a universal human reaction, a sudden spike of adrenaline, but for a Black American, it carries an added, heavy layer of historical and personal anxiety. She takes a slow, deep breath, consciously regulating her heart rate. She closes her laptop, places it on the passenger seat, and rolls her window down completely, placing both hands firmly on the steering wheel where they are clearly visible. She waits. In the side mirror, she watches the deputy approach. He is walking with that deliberate, rolling swagger that telegraphs authority, his hand resting casually but purposefully near his duty belt. He stops just behind the B-pillar of her car, forcing her to turn her head awkwardly to look at him, a classic tactical maneuver designed to keep the driver at a psychological and physical disadvantage. The deputy leans in slightly, the heavy scent of his uniform starch and aftershave cutting through the humid air. He does not offer a greeting. He simply demands license, registration, and proof of insurance. Eleanor keeps her voice level, calm, and stripped of any defensiveness. She asks, "Good afternoon, officer. Could you tell me why I'm being stopped?" Miller's jaw tightens. He expects immediate compliance, deference, maybe even a little fear. The polite but firm question feels, to him, like defiance. He gestures vaguely toward the front of her car. "You're parked illegally, too close to the hydrant, license and registration." Eleanor looks at the hydrant, then back at him. She knows the municipal code. She is parked perfectly legally. "I believe the ordinance requires a distance of 10 feet, officer. I am easily 15 feet away. I just pulled over to answer an email." Miller's eyes narrow. The fact that she knows the ordinance, the fact that she is articulating it so clearly irritates him. His bias interprets her intellect as arrogance. "I'm not out here to debate the tape measure with you," he snaps, his tone hardening. "Hand over your documents now." Eleanor complies. She narrates her movements slowly. "My license is in my purse on the passenger seat. I am reaching for it now." She hands over the cards. Miller snatches them, his eyes darting around the interior of the Volvo, looking for anything out of place. He walks back to his cruiser. Here, in the quiet of the street, the legal clock begins ticking. Under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, the people are protected against unreasonable searches and seizures. A traffic stop, even for a parking violation, is a seizure. The Supreme Court established in Terry v. Ohio that an officer must have reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been, is being, or is about to be committed to justify a brief investigatory stop. And further, as established in Rodriguez v. United States, a police officer may not extend a completed traffic stop for extraneous questioning or searches without independent reasonable suspicion. Miller is running her license. It comes back spotless again. He has no legal justification to detain her a second longer than it takes to write a parking citation. If he truly believes she is too close to the hydrant, his only lawful move is to write the ticket, hand it to her, and leave. But Miller's pride is bruised and his unfounded suspicion has not been satisfied. He wants to know what she is really doing here. He prints the citation, but he decides to push the envelope. He walks back to her window. He hands her the ticket and her license. The stop, legally speaking, should now be concluded. But instead of stepping away, Miller leans back in. "So, where are you coming from today?" he asks, his voice adopting a deceptive conversational tone. Eleanor places her license back in her wallet. "I don't see how that is relevant to a parking citation, officer." Miller's face flushes. The perceived disrespect is now intolerable to him. He decides to escalate. "Are there any weapons or illegal narcotics in the vehicle?" he asks. "No," Eleanor replies flatly. "Mind if I take a look around?" Miller asks, placing a hand on her doorframe. This is the critical juncture. This is where procedural rights clash with institutional power. "I do not consent to any searches," Eleanor states clearly. Her voice does not shake. She is looking directly into his eyes. Miller bristles. In his mind, refusal to consent is evidence of guilt, even though the courts have repeatedly and explicitly ruled that asserting a constitutional right cannot be used to form probable cause. Deprived of his consent, Miller manufactures a reason. He leans in closer, sniffing the air theatrically. "I smell the odor of raw marijuana," he declares. It is a lie. It is one of the oldest, most impossible to disprove lies in the history of modern policing. A verbal skeleton key used to unlock the Fourth Amendment. "Step out of the vehicle." Eleanor's grip on the steering wheel tightens. She knows exactly what is happening. The Supreme Court ruling in Pennsylvania versus Mims gives an officer the right to order a driver out of a vehicle during a lawful traffic stop for officer safety. But this was a parking ticket, and the business of the stop had been concluded. The extended detention is unlawful. The claim of marijuana is fabricated. She is now being illegally detained, but she also knows that the side of the road is not the place to litigate constitutional law. Arguing with an armed, angry officer on a deserted suburban street is a game of Russian roulette. She unbuckles her seatbelt. "I am stepping out," she says calmly. "But I want to state for the record that I believe this is an unlawful extension of a stop. You lack probable cause, and I do not consent to any search of my person or my property." Hearing a citizen use precise legal terminology acts like an accelerant on Miller's temper. As soon as Eleanor's feet touch the pavement, he grabs her left arm roughly, spinning her around and pressing her chest against the hot metal of her own car. "Stop resisting," he shouts, though she hasn't moved a muscle against him. He kicks her feet apart. The sheer physical aggression of it knocks the breath out of her. He pulls her arms behind her back, the metal teeth of the handcuffs biting violently into her wrists, clicking ratchets tight enough to restrict circulation. "You're under arrest," he barks, patting her down aggressively. "For what?" Eleanor manages to ask, turning her cheek against the searing heat of the roof. "Disorderly conduct and obstruction of a police investigation," he replies, dragging her toward the back of his cruiser. He forces her into the suffocating hard plastic back seat of the SUV, slamming the door shut. Trapped in the cramped cage-like back seat, smelling the stale sweat and despair of 100 previous occupants, Eleanor focuses on her breathing. She watches through the reinforced glass as Deputy Miller tears through her car. He rips open the glove box, scattering registration papers. He pulls her laptop bag from the passenger seat, unzipping it and rummaging through her academic notes. He opens the trunk. He is searching frantically for the justification he needs, the post facto probable cause to make this nightmare stick. He finds nothing. No drugs, no weapons, no stolen goods. Just highlighters, legal pads, and a spare tire. He slams the trunk shut, visibly agitated. He has made a massive procedural error, but his ego will not allow him to back down. He gets into the driver's seat, avoiding her eyes in the rearview mirror, puts the cruiser in gear, and drives toward the precinct. The booking process is a deliberate exercise in dehumanization. It is designed to strip a person of their autonomy and break their spirit. Eleanor is paraded through the fluorescent-lit bullpen of the Oak Creek police station in handcuffs. Other officers glance up, look away, and go back to their paperwork. She is ordered to surrender her belt, her shoelaces, her jewelry. She is fingerprinted, her hands pressed forcefully onto the glass scanner by a bored booking officer. She is photographed against a cinderblock wall, the harsh flash immortalizing her exhaustion and quiet outrage. Finally, she is placed in a holding cell that smells sharply of bleach and urine, the heavy iron door clanging shut with a finality that echoes in her chest. She sits on the cold steel bench and waits. She does not cry. She does not scream. She is calculating. After 2 agonizing hours, an officer approaches the bars and slides a telephone through a small slot. You get 1 call. Eleanor dials a number she knows by heart. It is not a family member. It is the personal cell phone of Marcus Thorne, the most feared civil rights litigator in the greater Chicago area, and a man she has known for 20 years. When he answers, her voice is steady. Marcus, it's Eleanor. I'm at the Oak Creek precinct. I need you to come get me. 30 minutes later, the atmosphere in the precinct shifts entirely. The heavy wooden door of the shift commander's office swings open and Marcus Thorne strides in, a tailored suit acting as his armor, an expensive leather briefcase in his hand. He bypasses the desk sergeant entirely and walks straight to the glass-walled office of the precinct captain. Deputy Miller is sitting in the bullpen, nursing a stale coffee, still trying to figure out how to write an arrest report that makes his fabricated marijuana smell sound plausible. The captain, a gray-haired man named Henderson, looks up as the attorney enters. Marcus doesn't wait for an invitation to speak. He drops his card on the desk. Captain Henderson, my name is Marcus Thorne. You are currently holding my client, Dr. Eleanor Vance, in your lockup on a phantom charge of disorderly conduct. Henderson frowns, looking at the intake sheet on his monitor. Thorne? Yeah, I know who you are. Your client was arrested by Deputy Miller for interfering with a lawful investigation. Marcus leans across the desk, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. Captain, I suggest you pull the dashcam and bodycam footage of that arrest immediately. Your deputy initiated a traffic stop for a parking violation. He issued the citation. The stop was legally concluded. He then unlawfully extended the detention without reasonable articulable suspicion, fabricated probable cause by claiming he smelled marijuana, illegally searched her vehicle under duress, and arrested her when she peacefully asserted her Fourth Amendment rights. Henderson crosses his arms. That's a nice story, counselor. We'll see what the judge thinks at arraignment. Marcus smiles, but it does not reach his eyes. Do you actually know who you have in that cell, Captain? Have you bothered to look at her employment history? Henderson glances at the screen again, squinting. Says here she works at the university. A teacher. She is not just a teacher, Marcus corrects him, the words striking like stones. Dr. Eleanor Vance is the tenured chair of constitutional law. She spent 5 years as an appellate judge. She wrote the textbook your academy uses to teach the Fourth Amendment. You haven't just arrested a citizen without cause. You have falsely imprisoned one of the foremost legal scholars in this state, and your deputy did it on tape. The silence that falls over the captain's office is absolute. The color slowly drains from Henderson's face. He looks through the glass at Deputy Miller, who is oblivious to the storm about to break over him. Henderson knows the law, and he knows civil liability. He knows the doctrine of qualified immunity protects officers from being sued personally when performing discretionary functions, but only if their conduct does not violate clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. Falsifying a reason to extend a traffic stop and arresting a woman for asserting her rights destroys that immunity. The department is looking at a massive Section 1983 civil rights lawsuit. They are looking at a Department of Justice inquiry. They are looking at a public relations catastrophe. Get her out of there, Henderson barks into his desk intercom, his voice cracking slightly. Now! When the holding cell door opens, Eleanor is sitting exactly where they left her. Her shoelaces and belt are returned to her in a brown paper bag. She walks out into the lobby where Marcus is waiting. They do not embrace. They share a look of grim, mutual understanding. Deputy Miller is standing near the front desk, looking bewildered as Captain Henderson practically shoves him out of the way to process the release paperwork. There's been a misunderstanding, Doctor. Vance, the captain stammers, refusing to meet her eyes. You are free to go. The charges are being dropped. Eleanor stops. She looks at Captain Henderson, and then she turns her gaze to Deputy Miller. She does not shout. Her voice is calm, precise, and carries the devastating weight of absolute authority. There is no misunderstanding, Captain. A misunderstanding is a clerical error. What happened today was a deprivation of liberty under the color of law. Your deputy targeted me because of his bias, he ignored his training, he violated my Fourth Amendment rights, and he fabricated a criminal charge to punish me for knowing the law better than he does. I am leaving now, but my attorney will be in touch on Monday. She turns and walks out the glass doors into the fading evening light, leaving a suffocating silence in her wake. If this were a movie, the story would end right there. Deputy Miller would throw his badge on the desk in disgrace, the captain would be fired, and justice would ring out immediately. But the American legal system does not work like a movie. It grinds slowly, protectively, and often frustratingly. The consequences are not swift. Over the next few weeks, the reality of the situation settles in. The district attorney officially declines to prosecute the disorderly conduct charge, citing insufficient evidence, quietly sweeping the false arrest under the rug to avoid acknowledging police misconduct. Deputy Miller is not fired. He is placed on paid administrative leave pending an internal investigation, a bureaucratic vacation while the police union rallies its defense. Eleanor and Marcus file the civil lawsuit in federal court. It is a grueling, exhausting process. The defense attorneys attempt to drag her name through the mud, subpoenaing her old records, trying to find any excuse to justify Miller's suspicion. They argue that Miller genuinely believed he smelled marijuana, a subjective claim that is incredibly difficult to disprove in court. They fight tooth and nail over the dash cam footage. Eleanor has to relive the humiliation of the arrest in endless depositions, facing across a conference table the man who took away her freedom. But she does not waver. She uses her own case as a living lesson for her law students, turning her trauma into a masterclass on the fragile nature of civil liberties. 18 months later, the city settles out of court for a substantial, undisclosed sum to avoid a public trial. As part of the settlement, the Oak Creek Police Department is forced to implement mandatory independent bias training and strict new protocols for vehicle searches. Deputy Miller quietly resigns from the force before the settlement is finalized, only to be hired by another police department 2 counties over. The system was not fixed overnight. A profound injustice occurred, and the remedy, while successful on paper, felt hollow. The story of Dr. Eleanor Vance is not just a tale of a bad apple on a police force. It is a stark illustration of how the law, as written in textbooks, can evaporate in an instant on the side of a dusty road when confronted with armed authority and unchecked bias. It reveals that the protections of the Fourth Amendment are only as strong as the willingness of those in power to respect them. When an officer can legally order you out of your car, and when the subjective claim of smelling something is enough to dismantle your constitutional shields, the line between lawful policing and harassment becomes dangerously blurred. It leaves us with a difficult, lingering reality to confront. If it takes the combined knowledge of a constitutional law professor and the threat of a massive federal lawsuit just to survive a simple parking violation and hold one officer accountable, what hope does the average citizen have? When the flashing lights appear in your rearview mirror, are you relying on the strength of the Constitution to protect you, or are you simply hoping the officer walking up to your window doesn't rely on their bias?